My name is John, and this is Please Allow Me. On episode 3, we sit with a truly kind soul disguised as a rugged star from a Super Bowl pickup truck ad, the kind of walking contradiction Hallmark movies are made for. He has a master's degree in social work. He's a licensed independent clinical social worker specializing in crisis intervention and mentoring, and he's certified in cognitive behavioral therapy. He's the owner and founder of Be Well at Black Barn Farm, a national champion and once Olympic hopeful wrestler, and just one of the better human beings going. Please allow me to introduce Sobhan Namvar. My man Soap, what the hell is going on?
What's up, John? How's it going, man? Thanks for having me. I'm good. Thanks. Thanks for having me, man. Beautiful place.
Oh, thanks for coming down from, where are you now? Were you up in Andover, Methuen? What's going on?
Yeah, so I live in Methuen, Massachusetts. I work in Andover, but I also work in Methuen. The farm is in Methuen, which is like about 40 minutes north of Boston.
So what's going on at the farm?
So much. So to tell you a little bit about the farm is a therapeutic farm. I'd like to think I'm one of the best therapists on the farm, but I'm not. The horses are. The horses, the mini donkeys, the sheep, and the chickens. You know, it's just that 11-acre farm, some trails cut out, 2 horses, 2 mini donkeys, and some sheep. And we run just like an untraditional therapy practice.
So what do you do with the animals in therapy?
That's so people imagine, I don't know if you've been to therapy or you know somebody who's been to therapy. Usually when you're going to therapy, you're probably going to like a 12 by 12 room with a couch. And if you know, if they've invested a lot of money in it, they might have a recliner in there. And you're basically sitting in a box talking about your deepest, darkest secrets. So talk therapy is awesome. We just kind of take the talk out and put a whole lot of action in, you know? So a little bit less conversation, a little bit more action, like Elvis said, you know?
Like Elvis.
So we use the horses. Horses are pretty powerful. Horses survive on the instinct of knowing what happens around them. So what we do is just put people around the horses. We do a lot of groundwork with the horses. And once in a while we get people who are like, I'm not scared of riding. I'm like, all right, sounds good. Jump on the horse.
It sounds like free labor.
Definitely it is. So the only way I feel, or I found, that you can get to some of the deepest stuff is through work. I think a lot of people think like maybe a shortcut to this is talking. Let me just talk about what's happening. But the reality is you got to put a whole ton of work in. I've found you've got to put a ton of work in to just kind of see what you're about. You know?
Do the animals kind of soften people up and break the barriers down?
Big time. I think the horses do. You know, I think some people come in angry. Some people come with like a tough exterior. And some people come just maybe, you know, they talk in a whisper. They don't feel too confident. And the horses are just awesome at picking that up. If they see anger, if they see like overconfidence, they challenge it. Which is awesome. And it's, you know, I don't know about you, but if something 1,200 pounds that could kick the shit out of me walked up to me, my real self would come out. So, so they're really great at doing that. I think, you know, a lot of people use horses to work with veterans, work with like PTSD, bipolar disorder. So we use them for that, you know. And before you even get to meet the horses, before you even get to walk with the horses, ride the horses, you're shoveling shit.
Right.
You're getting the bedding done for them. You're feeding them. So there's so much work. And I think that battles all the instant gratification. You know, I'm here, you have horses, I want to ride them.
Right.
Like, it takes work.
Well, it's like everybody wants to hit, nobody wants to play the field.
Exactly.
I saw there was a program I read about where they were using like cats as therapy for violent criminals in prisons, and they were allowing these criminals to raise the feral cats. Whew. And they were doing all these kinds of studies far beyond anything I understand. And these guys were just like totally like warming up to the cats and giving them a sense of responsibility, something to care for. And you know, cats they're different animals. You know, they're going to give you attention on their terms. Yeah. So it's something that you had to work for and earn for these prisoners. So
that's pretty powerful.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. So it's a pretty cool thing.
So who takes care of all the animals? You and the people on the farm?
Yeah, so me, Jessica, my wife, and hopefully Yas pretty soon, our daughter. And we have a few volunteers. We have a few awesome volunteers. Some just have a love for animals. Some, may not be there for therapy, in a formal sense of it, but they just enjoy being outside and being with the animals. So it's a 24/7 kind of chore. Every morning starts the same way. You're going to smell some horse poop and donkey poop and sheep poop, but you got to take care of it. And then every night ends the same way. So honestly, for myself, it's been one of the best ways of starting my day and ending my day. Pretty much after wrestling, this is probably like the most responsibility I've ever had,
So it's more or less ubiquitous therapy, just being out there, being with the animals, being in the fresh air. Yeah.
And you know where we live,
Right.
There's no way it's 12 months of 60-degree weather, 65-degree weather. If it snows, we do it. If it rains, we do it. If it's a hot day, we do it. If it's a beautiful day, we do it. So
there's something about that level of dedication and what people do where like the built-in circumstances and excuses that most people have, you don't pay any attention to. It's like when you have a goal or when you have a real responsibility, like the farm, or I would imagine like a kid, or like if you have an athletic goal or whatever, you don't let rain, you don't let snow, you don't let those little things get in the way. You don't a whisper of a hangover won't stop you. A bad one might stop you,
but it's interesting. It's like that thought is not even available. I think of like the time of wrestling, like think about yourself, right? So like the times that you wrestled, like think about the cutting weight, think about like the person that you had to wrestle, think about like all the work you did, and like all that is going to be defined in 6 minutes. Right. That thought of like, oh, it's raining, it's not convenient for me, or it's snowing, it's not convenient for me, or whatever, or I had a bad night, or my dad yelled at me, or my mom and dad are fighting, or I don't know, I'm hungry. It's just that thought's not available. It's just the thing that you have to do it. But there's a beautiful thing about that, and we bring that to therapy. So it's like, oh yeah, you want to talk about your anxiety, but you have to show up. You have to do work. There's nothing. There's no way around it. So it's just awesome, man. Awesome,
man. That's really cool.
Yeah,
it's a powerful thing to have something drive you like that, where eat the things that would normally stop you from participating in day-to-day tasks. They don't stop you.
No.
Do you remember a couple of years ago when they were toying around with canceling wrestling from the Olympics?
Oh yeah.
And then Jay Moore, the comedian / actor, wrote that like awesome piece about wrestling, and it was all about like, when no one's looking and when no one's watching, you're doing your jobs just so you could get up and and basically in your underpants at 6 a.m. and drive to some school somewhere no one's ever heard of, and get on the mat with somebody else. That's kind of like what I think of, that level of dedication, and it's almost like a sense of duty.
Yeah.
Right. It's not like you have a sense of duty to yourself, but it's almost like militaristic in that like a lot of people in the military who are in the military for a sense of duty, which not everyone is. I feel like wrestling is one of those things, and like taking care of animals is one of those things that provides you with like a sense of duty and a sense of purpose. Like my cat here she's 21, and no matter what I'm doing, she gets fed. If I'm out all day, I come home and feed her. If I'm not going to be home, like I have someone that comes here, City Kitty Boston, they're tremendous. They come in, they feed her 3 times a day, so she's never alone. It's like that sense of duty, I think, that inspires a lot of people.
But so everything you just said is about throwing yourself in the process that's bigger than yourself. Like wrestling, I think of that, taking care of animals. It's just a process that's bigger than yourself. I think a lot of the problems that I'd say I sit with probably like around 10 to 15 people a day, and most of the issues come from me.
Right.
I am the center of my world.
Right.
And this lack of connection to something bigger than yourself. Like when we think of wrestling, and regardless of wherever you look at wrestling, in America, in the Middle East, in Europe, it's this dedication, this like connection to something that's so much bigger than yourself that you show up for every day. I think that's a powerful thing.
Because if you don't treat it that way, you're never going to be successful. And if you're not successful at something, most people don't continue to do it.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting phenomenon. I can recall, like, I remember like being in basic training, and I'm afraid of heights, and we had to walk across this footbridge, and it had like no railings, and it was over this ravine, and like I was legit shitting my pants, and I was like, how can I get out of doing this?
Mm.
But you're in a platoon with all these guys, and you're just stuck in the middle of it, and you can't not do it. You have to move forward and do it. And so, you walk across the thing. I'm scared of heights, so I was scared to death. And then probably like a year later, I was on my way to school for my undergrad, and I had this like little piece of shit Geo Metro that probably I could like curl it to get a workout. And it broke down. And I was maybe like 3 miles from campus. And I was like, well, guess I'm not going to class today. And I was like, you know what? Like the lesson I learned from crossing that footbridge, I grabbed my books and I was like, I'll just run. And then I just left my car where it was and I ran and I got to class. And, I don't know that I have that in me anymore, like because of the knees and stuff, but it was like that sense of duty to the task that I was a part of, that I learned through the military. And I applied it in that situation so that I was able to get to class on time, which seems like a menial little task, but like it builds, those things build. Like confidence is built, on a series of small little victories. And that was a little victory for me. And then the next obstacle that comes up, you're a little bit less quick to let it defeat you. You just keep on moving and moving and moving and moving.
Definitely. You said that thing about your knees. Maybe it's not physically available for you to that extent.
Right.
But I guess I would bet on any given day, it's mentally available for you.
Right. So up at the farm, is your wife Jess, is she tutoring there also?
Yeah. So she's a math teacher. She's great with the numbers, it's just unbelievable. She just sees the world in that way. She's very logical, and it's just it's a great balance. She offers like middle school tutoring, high school tutoring, algebra, geometry. Just she's awesome. She has a really real cool way about her. You've spent some time shooting with us. I don't know if you can say shooting on here, but
I think we can say it.
Perfect. Shooting with us.
So at some point, will you guys be just self-sustainable at the farm, tutoring and doing therapy at the farm?
Yeah, that's the whole goal. We're almost there. We're it's putting a lot of work in. We've been putting a lot of work in, but the goal is to be able to tutor. So educate yourself, learn how to move, and learn about yourself as much as possible. That's the whole goal of the farm.
Tell me about the movement room.
Yeah, nice. Well, a big part of Broadway Jiu-Jitsu, your school, is a huge part of the movement room, because our movement room is I would say about like 30 by 30 wrestling room. That's so natural to come out, but it's the movement room. It's more than wrestling. Mm-hmm. But if you've ever been to John's school, you would know, if you recognize those gray mats. So we use that room for some pad work, for wrestling, for rolling around, for just body-based experiential stuff. So some people, for the first time, depending on their athletic abilities, they might just learn how to do a front roll. They might just learn how to stand up. They might just learn how to like circle comfortably, And we also do like yoga and mindfulness and meditation in that room too. So it looks at the horses. So when you open up the garage door, it looks at the horses. So it's kind of cool.
Who teaches the yoga?
So we have a few yoga instructors who used to belong to like yoga studios who are not open anymore. So they come in and do some one-on-one stuff and some small group stuff. And if it's nice enough outside, they're on the grass, they're on the pasture doing yoga.
Oh, that's awesome.
Cool, yeah.
That's awesome. And you getting to do any wrestling in there?
Yeah, I won't say a bunch of wrestling yet, but I think we've had a group of like 4 people so far in there, 4 kids, and we have like a wild bunch of boys on Saturday mornings that just come, and they're not wrestlers, but we don't call it wrestling. They just come and move around. Naturally, they all wrestle each other.
Yeah, so, little boys. Exactly. How old are they?
Yeah, so late elementary school, early middle school.
So it's like creative play. You're giving them an outlet that maybe they're not getting in school anymore.
Absolutely, 100%. They socialize with one another. It's okay to move around and push each other around, and it's okay to cope with it. And it's awesome. Like there's not too much coaching. Like, oh, take a high crotch or take a head inside signal. It's just like move, just move, and be okay with the outcome. There's no crying if the outcome is not your favorable outcome. There's no running back to me. I mean, you can go to the horses if you want, and just like, oh, he took me down. Like, the horse is probably just gonna give you an exhale and just walk away. So it's pretty cool, man. It's awesome.
Do kids that age have recess anymore in public schools, or are they just locked in the classrooms?
Locked in the classrooms. If you
outside of COVID, obviously.
Exactly. Even like pre-COVID, right? Pre-COVID, if you moved around, you ran around, you were too physical, you're probably staying after school or you're being told no, you know? And I just
So
don't think we
fucked
learn.
up.
It beyond fucked up, man. We don't learn like that.
No.
Boy, girl, whatever. You just don't learn like that, man. It's just, it's not fair to humans.
So what's the reason why they're not giving these kids in some of these public schools recess? Is it because it's like unfair and like that's where hierarchies are formed and you know, like the cool kid is going to talk to the cute girl and then like the kid who's, you know, the kid who hasn't blossomed yet is going to feel left out? Is that the reasoning? I
think, you know, I think my crazy theory is if they gave recess, then probably a child psychiatrist and all the people who write the ADHD meds and like the behavior meds and stuff like that would be kind of out of business, you know?
Well, I mean, I'm real old now, but I can remember being in middle school where and having them like recommend like an ADHD drug Ritalin to me, and I was just like, I don't want to take any of that stuff. But like, you know, you're stifling these kids. Like those kids are the creative kids, and what you're trying to do is you're saying, listen, you're moving, you're thinking, you're doing all these things, and we just don't want to deal with that. So we want to give you this drug so that you fall in line and that our job becomes easier.
Yeah. So it's interesting, man. Some of these kids that come to the farm on the weekend, they all fill out an intake on our system, right? And most of the intakes say medication, Ritalin, Adderall, some sort of a ADHD-based medication. These are elementary school kids. These are middle school kids. So I tell the parents, I'm like, no medication when they come here. And they're like, well, no, it'll be too much. I'm like, they'll be all right.
It'll be too much for the parent.
Exactly. Yeah. And the teacher, right? Who's saying like, you got to sit, shut up and learn, which for the boys is not like that. Some of our activities are, there's 8 of you guys. You got to run the trails. Well, we won't remember the trails. How do we know if we'll safely get back? I'm like, you'll safely get back. You'll be fine. It's 11 acres. It's not, you know, it's not like, you know, you're in the White Mountains, you know? So they work together. They figure it out. And the parents say like, the kids leave here and they're just, I don't know. They're balanced. They're awesome. Their energy's good. They're talking to me on the ride home. I'm like, yeah, that's what it takes, man. Movement.
So like the drugs that they're giving to these kids who are a little bit hyperactive and creative, like, does it seem almost like it's to pacify them the same way that like a parent shoves an iPad in a little kid's face in a restaurant?
100%, man. And that's all it is. And instead of like, we have the opportunity to take the classroom outside, you know? I think that's what we're doing. We're taking that classroom outside around animals, in the movement room, and in the trails. So
it's like, I see it sometimes in some of my students, especially the kids who are like in their early 20s. I can tell who's been like raised through their formidable years on an iPad. They can't look you in the eye. They can't take any criticism. Like, you know, it's clear that they never learned how to socialize with people that weren't in their family. You know, you don't know how to say, manners have gone out the window because these kids don't say please and thank you because you take them to a restaurant when they're 10 years old and they don't even look up from the iPad, you know, and they're mumbling stuff. Like, my dad would have smacked the shit out of me if we were in public and I was staring at a computer screen instead of like talking to a human being. I would have definitely gotten mollywops for that one.
Yeah, man. It's just I don't know. It seems like raising kids or teaching kids is just not convenient for these systems. You know? Well, the reality is it takes a lot of work.
Right.
And the reality is it takes a lot of uncomfortable work for everyone. But it really isn't. I mean, if you think of it, wrestling is uncomfortable, right? Putting your shoes on is uncomfortable. Cutting weight is uncomfortable. None of it is convenient, you know?
But isn't that part of the social contract when you have a kid? Isn't that part, like, you're saying, okay, I'm having a kid now and, you know, I'm going to do all these things and I'm going to do it the right way. And, you know, part of it to an extent, like for me, like I know that if I go to a nice restaurant and there's like a young, people are probably going to get pissed at this. But I go to a nice restaurant and there's some like sniveling little bastard screaming and yelling and throwing crayons everywhere and stuff like that. You're ruining someone else's experience and then it looks bad on the business. And it's like, okay, you're giving him the crayons and everything else like that. But part of the contract is that like you've probably agreed to do a certain job and you just don't feel like doing it right now. So you're going to take this kid out to a restaurant so you could go to a nice dinner, but it's at the peril of all the people who are sitting around you.
Yeah.
And it's a very selfish thing. And it's like, I get the feeling that people want to parent on a convenience basis, which I mean, there's a reason why we have, you know, almost 400 students at my gym and we don't have a single kid.
That's makes sense. Yeah.
Because the parents, they you know, it's they treat it in a different way. But
Yeah.
I don't want to go off on a tangent like that because
No.
I don't have any idea what I'm talking about. I'm just
I
I'm
think
an
you do.
observer. I'm an observer.
Well, you teach people, man. You teach people. I think you're right. Sure, you don't have any kids, but I bet emotionally you have a lot of kids. You know, kids that maybe stopped growing at age 12. You know, their age is grown, but like maybe emotionally they haven't grown because of this thing. So I think they get to get the best lessons. You know, the realest lessons.
You can see it. You can see it in a lot of these kids who like, you know, they don't know how to approach a person. They don't know how to look you in the eye. They don't know how to like, everything they've done has been digital their whole lives. And it's been, you can definitely see it. And having to cope with winning and losing in a combat sport, I think is really beneficial to those types of kids. And, you know, I think everyone should do it.
Yeah, I think so too, man. I mean, just, I don't know, wrestling, grappling is such a life-changing experience.
But in where you're from in Iran, it's the national sport, isn't it?
Yes, yeah. So in Iran, wrestling is the national sport. So I lived in Iran for about 17 years. I moved here when I was a junior in high school, and I wrestled when I started wrestling at 13. You know, so I can talk a little bit about that in a second. But it's a part of life. It's a part of culture. Some of the Persian mythology books that you read about, like Rostam and Sohrab, this father and son, which is really cool. If you ever read like Ferdowsi's like poems, he has like a Divan Hafiz is the name of it. And it's a story of a father and a son that they're estranged because the father is at war and he's a great wrestler. And he ends up facing his son on the battlefield in a wrestling match. And he breaks his son's back. But the son was fighting and at war to find his father. And so after he breaks his son's back, he realizes that he sees like the armband that he has. And he's like, I gave this armband to my wife to give to my son. When I was
he didn't know it was his son?
Know it was his son.
Oh, and the son hit the streets looking for dad. And when he found him,
became the greatest warrior, found his dad, and dad kills him.
That's not a great story, dude.
It's a crazy, but there's so much to it, right? So like, I even think of it. It's just, there's so many lessons to it. Obviously, Ferdowsi is like an awesome poet, but like the whole story of this is how this boy becomes a great wrestler, to become like his dad, who was a great wrestler, you know, and the best wrestlers were the warriors, you know. So this is very much in like Persian mythology, like, and Persian, like the early learnings is all about wrestling. And the lessons from wrestling, about being humble, about being hardworking, about being consistent, you know? So that's a big part of it. So you learn that in Farsi literature, you're reading poems about wrestling. It's really hard not to wrestle in Iran, you know? So
we need some wrestling poetry.
Yeah.
When I was in high school, we used to have these like assemblies, and I was a freshman, and then the varsity wrestlers, the kids that were like seniors, they would go up and make announcements, and they'd say, hey, wrestling poetry reading on Friday night. All that meant was we were going to go get drunk. But that was code for a wrestling party. But anyway, let's get back on track. Yeah. So when you're in Iran, I mean, is it like Little League Baseball over there with the wrestling?
Yeah, pretty much. So at least I can speak for my city, and I can talk a little bit outside of Tehran. So I grew up in Tehran, and then Tehran's broken down into like 21 sections.
How big is Tehran?
Oh boy, man, it's more crowded than it's big, you know.
Right.
Geographically, from North Tehran to South Tehran, you can probably within a few hours you can get there, you know, on a motorcycle. Within a few hours you can get there, but it's just crowded. Every neighborhood
on a motorcycle.
I know. And every neighborhood has its own wrestling club, and it's free. You don't pay to go to wrestling. And usually when you show up to wrestling, there's usually 3 sessions a day.
Bro, this says there's 10 million people in the urban center of Tehran.
That's
a lot of motherfuckers.
That's a lot of people, man. Okay. That's why traffic is crazy, man. There's no traffic laws. And think about it. Any wrestling room you walk into, you're not going to find any room under 80, 90 people wrestling.
That's like New York City.
Yeah.
The city itself,
It's crazy. And then a majority of people, it's hard to walk around and see people without cauliflower ears. And I think about it, jiu-jitsu I don't want to say it doesn't exist in Iran, but it's not, it hasn't found its place in Iran yet, because wrestling is such a big place. So like if you're seeing cauliflower ears, more than likely you're seeing a wrestler. So
I don't ever see jiu-jitsu taking over a culture that's married to wrestling. I think it could complement it, but like, the growth of jiu-jitsu in America, I think it fills a void. It doesn't overtake wrestling. It's like I don't think anyone who has fallen in love with wrestling will ever say, I'm going to now switch and be a jiu-jitsu guy. They might understand the value of it and then add it as a compliment. And like, maybe they just love grappling in general. But I feel like wrestling has a certain mentality. There's always like people arguing about wrestling versus jiu-jitsu and what's good and what's better. The difference to me is that places where wrestling is really, really popular, it's less of a business and more of a lifestyle and a sport. Whereas places where jiu-jitsu is popular, it's more of a business. And like, yes, it's a lifestyle, but it's more of like a social media lifestyle. Like you kind of want to let people know you're doing it. Like, you know, a good wrestler doesn't walk down the street and like snap Instagram photos of his like wrestling gi and be like getting ready for battle, bro. But a bunch of fucking jiu-jitsu assholes like take pictures of their gis all the time and they're like getting ready for battle, bro. Like, you know, you go to a jiu-jitsu tournament and it's like some guy smacks you and mollywops you in like 3 seconds in a tournament, like, and you take a picture with him for Instagram. I never did that in wrestling. No, I never want to talk to him again. Yeah.
I'm actually going back for finding a way to beat him.
Yeah. What tournament is he registered for?
Yeah.
Now, I don't know if that's healthy or unhealthy. I just know that that's the way it is. And like, I started out as a wrestler and obviously I love jiu-jitsu, but I view them as different things. And I don't see a time where jiu-jitsu will overtake an existing wrestling population. It may fill a hole where there is no grappling or where certain people don't have the physical skill set to be able to wrestle because it's a very, very different thing. So I do see that, but I don't see jiu-jitsu taking over a country like Iran or an area like Dagestan. It's a compliment. It's a compliment.
No, definitely. That's awesome, man. Yeah, you make that whole point of like taking a picture with your gi and all this stuff. There's something about wrestling, at least the culture of wrestling in Iran. You're supposed to hang your head low. You're supposed to, you know, not walk with your chest out. You're supposed to help the old lady in your neighborhood who's like maybe bringing her groceries in.
Right.
You're supposed to kind of be under the radar, you know? You're supposed to like do, like if you're tough, whatever, all that's supposed to just show up on the mat. It's not really supposed to show up in your neighborhood, you know? So it's really cool, but you never know who you're walking amongst, you know? So if the guy with the biggest chest and the arms out is usually not the toughest guy.
We used to call those guys styrofoam dummies. They look big and strong, but
makes sense. Yeah.
But I think social media has changed the game. The same way that you were talking earlier about how like you know, Ritalin and ADHD drugs, they kind of like the ripple effect of that is that you get more business. I get business because of Instagram.
Right.
Like when I first started jiu-jitsu and there was no Instagram, I mean, like we had MySpace back in the day. You know, I was like, no, nobody cared. And now it's like, you see people and their whole Instagram is dedicated to being about jiu-jitsu, which is great. I think it's really good for the sport, but I think it's really good for the sport when it's genuine. I don't think it's good for the sport when it's a totally fabricated, self-absorbed, self-involved thing. The reality is most people make friends when they're in jiu-jitsu class, and a lot of their other friends don't do jiu-jitsu. So you can go on your social media and you can post that picture of you in the third place, you know, on the podium for third place. And your friends don't know that you didn't win a single match to get there. And they're just going to be like, bro, that's sick that you went to that tournament and you took third or you took second and all these other things. And, you know, they don't really understand that what went into that. And you get to sell them and you get to create this reality of yourself. And I think that's like one of the issues with social media in general.
You come up empty inside over and over again. That's the reality of that.
And I'm sure it's the same thing for all other industries. I just only know about my industry. And people will go on social media and kind of like construct this reality about their life in jiu-jitsu when like more authentic, for lack of a better term, like the OGs look at it and they're just like, dude, you're an idiot. You're an idiot. My coach would have smacked the shit out of me for doing something like that. So there are definitely a lot of differences between the jiu-jitsu culture and the wrestling culture. You know, when I teach jiu-jitsu, a lot of times my students will always hear me say when they do something, I say, that's why wrestlers laugh at us. Because I don't ever want that to happen. And I don't think it's inherent in each art. The art one art isn't better than the other. One art's not harder than the other or softer than the other. It's the way the art is taught. That's the big thing for me. Like, there are a ton of tough jiu-jitsu guys, and there are a ton of soft fucking jiu-jitsu guys who don't know anything. And in general, wrestling is just taught in a tougher manner because coaches are on a salary. They don't get paid more the more people come into your room. A jiu-jitsu coach gets paid more the more people come into the room. And so they're incentivized to make it more accommodating for the average Joe. These incentives are not lined up.
No, that's a really good point, man. I distinctly remember this memory of look up Abbas Jadidi, right? He's the guy who
I'm gonna have to get you to spell that.
I'm gonna spell that. So Abbas and then Jadidi, Jadidi, roughly spelled like that. He's the guy that lost to Kurt Angle in the Olympic finals. It was a controversial match. He was a beast. That match is a very famous match. He was a 2-time world champion, silver medalist in the Olympics. He got popped for steroids once, and I think won maybe 2 more world championships. Pretty badass guy.
Yeah, nice resume.
Yeah, right. He came back to our gym. He was from our gym, from our wrestling school, and our coach, so you could picture our coach. He was on one of the Olympic teams, broke his neck. He didn't actually wrestle with us. He did all the instruction. And he'd walk around practice with a belt. So there was no like, take a shot or we're going to sprint. It was, you're going to get smacked with the belt, Jadidi came in, took his pants off, had the singlet on. Like, did when the bodybuilders shake their leg before they flex? Yeah, so she shook his leg, flexed it. And he was doing this in all like good humor, and he's like, I'll give this much money to anybody that can take this leg down. He never made it on the mat. My coach kicked him out of the gym.
Really?
Yeah. To me, that was like, and I was a kid at the time, I was like, holy shit.
Yeah.
This is a world champion. We just watched him on TV a few weeks ago. He's back to his wrestling school. And he just got kicked out. He didn't even get a chance to step on the mat.
That's awesome.
It's unreal. So obviously we didn't have social media then. I would imagine that today would be if he posted a picture of his medal on the podium, whatever, and said like, look how special I am.
Oh man, the Reddit BJJ subreddit, whatever the hell it is, they be going crazy, pitchforks. Everyone's so mean. What a fucking bunch of crybabies that shit is. And the sad part about that is, like, not to get off on that, is that like there's a bunch of people on like the Reddit like BJJ forum who probably don't train or probably like never really trained. And they're dictating how gyms are being run because like gym owners are so in tune to what's going on that forum that they're starting to change the way they do shit so that they don't wind up the subject of some, thread bashing them. So inadvertently, all these little internet kids that like don't even train, or maybe they're like 2-stripe white belts, or their last class was 3 years ago, they're having a real impact on how martial arts is being taught.
That's sad.
It's kind of like a crazy thing.
Yeah.
I wanted to go back really quickly to one other thing that you said, and it's kind of like one of the other differences between jiu-jitsu and a lot of other sports. And maybe as like an aging, more injured jiu-jitsu coach, I feel this, and it's a little bit more real now. Like, I remember wrestling, and in high school, it's one thing, and you have younger coaches. And my brief, like 6 weeks wrestling in college was different. But jiu-jitsu is a coach where people expect the instructor to be able to hang with like the top competitors in the room, which is like, I don't know really where I'm even going with this, because I kind of like it. I like that that's an expectation of me, but I don't feel like that's an expectation of like wrestling rooms or other sports.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think of this, man. Jose Moavignon, that was our coach. He never wrestled. He never wrestled when we wrestled. He had put his time in.
Was he famous? Did people know who he was, and that's how they like became to revere him and respect him and trust his technique?
Yeah, definitely. But because of the time he put in, and he was on the Olympic team with a broken neck and all. But the only reason we went to that gym is because we lived in the same neighborhood as him. That's it. Nobody from a different neighborhood was coming there. We just went. We lived in that neighborhood, so we went to his. He was the guy that taught there, but it wasn't about like, let me see if I can take him down. Let me see if I can stop his takedown. It wasn't about that. It's just, I think that's a cultural thing, and it's just a unfair expectation.
Right.
It's just, I don't want to say unfair. It's just a stupid expectation. It's just like, yeah, of course. So do you think if you cross paths with your jiu-jitsu instructor, at the time where he was competing, you would have a chance. And I could comfortably say, probably not. And I would even go further. I'm like, you probably wouldn't be in the gym at the time that your instructor trained.
Right.
If it's a real instructor. So
Right.
I'd use your...
I don't know that I could be my instructor now.
But like if we put the time together, the reality is most of the people that are in most of the jiu-jitsu rooms, they probably wouldn't even dare to walk in the room when you were in the room. That's just the...
Right. It was a different world back then.
It is a different world, you know? So I think that's already, there's a great amount of knowledge that's been earned with
Right.
time and blood and sweat that you just got to trust that process. It's not about like, can I beat my instructor? I would never think like, it never actually passed my mind. I don't think anybody else's mind in our wrestling room that like, I wonder if I can beat my wrestling coach.
I'm guilty of that. I'm guilty of like, and not from like a standpoint of like I just wonder, like, it's been so long since I've trained with my instructor. I mean, my instructor, Fabio Arujo, I mean, he taught me, you know, he brought me from a newt to, you know, the cusp of being able to learn from other people. You know, he taught me he gave me all the foundation, he gave me all the basics, and he put me in a position where I was able to absorb techniques and information from other people. And it's just one of those things, like, you just spend 10 years getting your ass kicked by someone, and you wonder, now it's been 10 years since I rolled with them, and now you're like, I wonder what it looks like now. And the truth of the matter is when you get on the mat, like, what I have found is when I get back with old training partners and stuff, no matter how much my game has evolved to this point, I revert back to the old style. And like, if my instructor and I started training right now, I probably would be a blue belt again. I would do all the blue belt things. Like, we would just fall into the same patterns. And then it would be difficult for me to get out of those patterns and those movements and stuff. Plus, it's just, you know, it's like you get the big brother thing going on. And it's like, you know, whether it's, you know, valid or not. But in jiu-jitsu, I do feel like that's a real thing. And for me, it's a point of insecurity, because sooner or later, like, I'm on the downside. And like, I was having a conversation with one of my really strong young students the other day. And as I've probably said to you before, he threw a triangle up and I started to defend it. And then I got out of it. And after the round, I said, don't ever let me out of a technique. If you get me in a fucking triangle, I want you to show me no quarter on the mat. Just because I'm old doesn't mean I'm not dead. I'm old, right? And he said, no, you escaped it legitimately. And I don't know if he's telling the truth or not, but he's a big, strong kid. But that part of it, like the part of wanting to still be competitive, and like, I don't want those guys to ever treat me differently because I have a bunch of injuries and because I'm older and stuff, because I don't have a lot of these miles left. And so I want to really enjoy the end of this ride. I'm not interested in anyone carrying me.
That's pretty cool. And that, I wonder if that can be passed on, you know? Like, how do you pass that on?
You can pass it on, but I think it only gets passed on to a handful of people. We're not changing the types of people that we make in this world. And if anything, we're making softer people.
True.
And I think that's only going to get passed on to a select few people.
That's a really good point, man. Yeah. I even, going back to the farm thing, you know, I think the whole thing on the farm, you know, it's like being wild, you know, that's the whole piece of it. It's just like, how do you stay connected to what your true nature is? The reality is those things can be passed on to you if you're closer to your like natural self, what you're supposed to be, not being behind computers and like the forum you mentioned, people sitting behind it. Like I just think of that like, man, yeah, it's fucked up, it's messed up, it's like weird. You're like setting the new culture, but you're just less human.
Right.
You're less human.
Right.
Like, your strength is sitting behind the keyboard. Like, your strength should be showing up.
Right.
Not for like winning or like succeeding, but just for showing up, you know, which I think failure is a big part of it too, you know, but I think that's what it means to be human. You know, when we got our horses, right? I got kicked by the horse. I got struck by the horse. So it's a difference. I found out kicking is the back legs, striking is the front legs. And I got bit by the horse.
Oh, that makes sense. It's like punching and kicking.
Yeah. So people imagine like horse. When you say horses, you either like think of these beautiful Mustangs in like the Pacific Northwest that are running in these like wild fields, or you see this perfect person with like the perfect outfit, like, or a cowboy that's like riding the horse and roping the cow.
It's like the cover of a Harlequin romance.
Right. Yeah. Right. But like, the work is about not being perfect. It's about being human, you know? The shit's smelly. There's no way you can make your horse's shit not to smell. You know? Like, there's no way. There's no feed you're going to give them, you know? And then there's no way to, like, make it, like, soft and easy and comfortable, you know? I think the whole thing about hiding behind keyboards is just, or hiding behind something is about making it comfortable for yourself. And if you're comfortable, yeah, you're probably doing it wrong.
Right. No, you're right. Like, I think the digital age makes people comfortable doing things that people that came before the digital age, they didn't have that luxury of comfort when they had to do it. It's like sometimes, like, you know, like we'll have a gym event or whatever, and there'll be some younger students, and they don't even, I mean, I don't know, maybe I was just an animal, but like, there's like a single pretty girl, like, go talk to her. And instead of trying to talk to her, they're like looking, maybe she's on a dating app. And so they just instantly start looking through the dating app. Like, I'm like, bro, grab a shot of tequila, grab your nuts, and roll on to the end of the bar and do your thing. Like, getting rejected is half the fun.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But that's like, it's sad that people are not okay with that, man. It's sad. You know? But again, it's you hide behind comfort. I think, and I think, you know, that's the whole thing about the farm, right? You got to be uncomfortable, you know?
Right.
A room is comfortable. Sitting on a couch is comfortable. But showing up in the snowstorm to talk about your anxiety or your depression or your trauma or your messed up relationship you have with yourself that maybe stems from somewhere else, it's kind of cool to get uncomfortable to talk about that stuff. And I think that's jiu-jitsu, that's wrestling, that's grappling, that's fighting. You know, there's no comfortable way of doing it. There really isn't. What
about when that becomes the comfort? I've been doing this so long now that, like, I can't do much else. And like, the thought of doing something else, or like being in like some other line of work or some other type of environment, like, that's less comfortable to me. Like, I mean, I say all the time, like, I got guys who come in, they're laborers and they work all day on a job site. Fuck that. I couldn't do that. I'd rather you ran me through drills and stuff like that until I threw up all over myself than do that. I would, like, I'm just so much more comfortable in that environment. And, you know, because you just, I mean, I guess the human body and mind can get used to almost anything.
Yeah. But look at this, like this whole thing, right? So you set up this whole thing in the midst of a pandemic.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, but this is the thing this is the new discomfort, right? So you're like, I'm so comfortable being on the mat and teaching, and like all this stuff is like, now this is my normal. That's the extent of like the good crazy you went to, right? Where like something that scares people is your comfortable zone. So you found the next thing that scares you, you know? Because I don't think too many things are going to physically challenge you, right? So you're just going to do it. You probably would do it to your knees. No, you know, that's just who you are, right? And which is a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
Then you're like, all right, what's that next thing? It might not be physical, but it might be mental. So then boom, this podcast comes. Then you freaking play the guitar. And like, you know, like, so I think that's what it is for me. So everybody's like, horses. I mean, you mid-30s, are you crazy? Are you out of your mind? I'm like, yeah, man.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a little bit out of my mind, you know, but like, you know, but like at 13, I heard the same thing. It's too late to start wrestling. You're in Iran. People start wrestling at 4. I'm like, all right, We'll see. 1 year, doesn't matter. I made up for all your 4 years to now you wrestled. I went to my wrestling practice, showed up in the morning, ran, and at nighttime after wrestling practice, I meet with the kids in my neighborhood. We run to the park, and everybody make some bets, and then we wrestle on the grass. That way, I already had 3 practices in one day. Yeah. Now I could do that 7 times. Times 3. So I'm like, we're good. You know?
Probably the 13 years before you started wrestling, like whatever athletic stuff you were doing, like those skills transferred into wrestling. Whereas the other guys who were wrestling from a younger age, they get caught in a system and they get caught kind of like locked into like having you've presented me with a wrestling problem. Now I've got a wrestling solution in terms of like your body and your mechanics and your movement and stuff. And your mind was probably more open. So let me ask you, when you were wrestling in Iran, what, like, obviously we've wrestled and I know that you're good, but tell me about like how good you were. What's the greatest accolade you've ever achieved in wrestling? How did you get there? And like, tell me a little bit about like coming to America at the age you came to America and the difference between the wrestling culture there and the wrestling culture here. And let's let people know we're in Massachusetts. We're not in fucking Western Pennsylvania wrestling. Yeah. Massachusetts wrestling in the United States, wrestling is a state by state thing and a region by region thing. So we're not necessarily in a wrestling hotbed.
Yeah, definitely, man. Yeah. So Tehran is it's just like a huge wrestling culture. So I think the other part of Iran that they produce some of the best wrestlers is north of Iran, Mazandaran. So, which is right on the Caspian Sea. That's where like your good guys, like your great guys in the Olympics come from, like the Yazdanis and like all the, you know, the guy that just like Askari Mohammadian, his son, who he's the one that almost like he was teching Snyder and then pinned him. So the caliber of wrestler that comes from up there is just something else, you know. And it's interesting because they're not too far from Dagestan. So there's some interesting
I
stuff.
want to talk about that too.
Yeah, so we're gonna talk. So as far as Iran, I started wrestling when I was 13. People thought I was crazy for picking up wrestling. The reason I picked up wrestling, honest, I'd like to tell you, like, I loved wrestling, and I didn't grow up in a great household. Like, my mom's awesome, my dad was hardworking. I have 3 awesome sisters. My dad was a little crazy, you know. So we ran away from home when I was 13. I wanted to wrestle since I was a little kid. It's just I wasn't given the permission to do that, you know. And it wasn't one of those things you could talk to your school counselor about. Just, if you weren't given permission, you just
that's the way it is. Don't interfere in the home.
Exactly. So at the age 13, we ran away from home. And we tried to come to America. You know, we went to the Caspian Sea, tried to cross the border, come to America. It didn't work out for my mom and sisters. So we came back to Tehran. And for about 3 years, we were on the run. In those 3 years, I picked up wrestling. Partly because I was done getting beat up at home, you know, and I was done getting beat up in some other places too. So I went to wrestling, and the wrestling mats is where I found a new place to get beat up, you know, for a long period of time. And then everybody told me I was crazy. It's like, wrestling at 13, whatever, you know. And for me, I had just a different goal. I kind of, maybe it was like being maybe blind in certain ways, and maybe it was good, you know, to be that way. Now that I think back, is because if I believed like starting at 13 was too late, or I didn't start at 4 or whatever, then maybe I wouldn't have been able to do this thing. So I got beat up for a good period of time. And then I would say like 12 months, 13 months into wrestling, I was at the Tehran State Championships, which is a 3-day tournament. Every weight class, most of the weight classes are like 100, 120 people per weight class. And then
120 people?
Per weight class.
Jesus.
Crazy. So think about like how many matches you have to get to the finals.
8 to win gold?
Yeah.
Something like that.
8 or 9 to win gold. Yeah. So 3-day tournament, the finals and the semifinals on the 3rd day. And 13 months in, I won that and went to the nationals, you know? And then most of my matches, 2-1, 3-2, you know? And the reason I mentioned that is, and I made the cadet national team over there, and everything was great. And then my dad found us, you know, so and at the same time I had gotten in trouble. So a lot was happening. So that's all like side story. And then at the age 17, I moved here. And the reason I said like that 2-1 match, 3-2 match, I moved to Needham, Massachusetts. Like you said, Massachusetts is not a hotbed for wrestling right now. It definitely wasn't in 2002, you know. It was just, I was happy that the school I went to had wrestling. And it was hard to explain to people like wrestling. And they're like, most people at that time would say like WWE, you know. Now people are definitely more educated about it because of like all the stuff that they've done. And it was easy. It was easy to make the team. I didn't have to wrestle anybody off, you know. It was just, and most of the matches in Massachusetts were easy. So the difficulty for me, you know, I hate to say that, you know, but like I wish. And I moved here by myself. You know, I didn't move here with my parents or my sisters, anybody. I moved here by myself. My grandmother was like, I don't understand what you're saying, like this wrestling thing that you're talking about, you know? And to be honest, I had no idea how to explain it to them. It was just like, all right, in Iran, there's no off season. It's just you wrestle all the time, you know? It's like brushing your teeth, you know? There's no way, like you wake up in the morning, by the time you go back to bed, you're going to wrestle one time, at least, you know? And it was hard. Like 2 months out of the year, you wrestled, and then like everybody was so serious. And to me, it didn't make sense because I'm like, how can you in 2 months make up for this like other 10 months that you're supposed to be wrestling? Like how can, like I just didn't understand it, you know? So most of my time, and my grandma didn't understand like camps and this. And honestly, I didn't understand it because we didn't have camps and these things that you got signed up for. You just went to your neighborhood club. So I would just, on the same time, you know, in the evenings and the afternoons, I would go to the football field, run around, and then practice my stance for as long as the wrestling practice would be. So you run a 2-hour practice, so I'd practice my stance for 2 hours, you know, and wrestled most of my matches. Obviously, won state, all states. Was All American here, Fargo, and yeah, I did pretty good. Wrestled in Division One, and then my family moved here, so I left the Division One program, came back home, competed internationally in freestyle, did pretty well, you know. But yeah, some knee injuries and different things, but I love wrestling, you know, and I love everything it did for me, and it continues to do for me, you know. So
in my opinion, wrestling is the greatest thing you can do with your adolescent years. I think the lessons that it teaches kids, boys and girls, I mean, I've discussed it a million times over, and it's just, until you do it, you don't get it. The number of people that I see and meet in my adult life that tell me, I wish I wrestled when I was a kid, it's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. If you have an opportunity, I mean, like, you know, it's better to regret something you have done than something you haven't done.
Yeah, it's so true, man. One thing I remember, like, when I started wrestling, I stopped becoming a victim. You know, it was like, well, he's stronger than me. He's in a different weight class. Oh, my dad beat me up. Or, well, this or that. And it was just like, it was amazing, man. And I tell you, I didn't have wrestling shoes when I started my first practice. I mean, it's really cool. Like, if people can just buy shoes on wrestling shoes on Amazon and buy the right shorts and the right t-shirt. But like, for the first 6 months of my wrestling practice, I come home with bloody feet. I didn't have wrestling shoes. And it wasn't like, oh my God, look at me, I don't have wrestling shoes. It's just, that was also the truth for a lot of other people who were wrestling around me. And then I got wrestling shoes.
Which is in stark contrast to me, which was I picked wrestling in 7th grade over basketball, and my dad bought the shoes. And when wrestling was too hard, he said, no, you have to finish because I already bought the shoes. Whew. And he said, you can do basketball next year, but you're not going to quit in the middle of something. And I bought these shoes. So, you know, we wind up in, you know, similar places for a lot of different reasons.
You know, that's so cool. Did you ever heard of like Gabe Dean, who wrestled for Cornell, NCAA champion? Yep. Beast, right? He talks about this letter his dad wrote to him when he wanted to just quit wrestling. And the guy is like just like a phenomenal athlete. He could have been on D1 like football or D1 wrestling or a bunch of different things. And his dad just said, like, you have to finish the season. You have to finish the season. And then whatever you decide from there. You know? Yeah. I think there's just something so cool. And it's similar to your story in that way of like, you have to finish the season.
Yeah.
That's to not have the out. It's like, that's the answer.
Yeah.
Like, we all look for an out. Like, oh, I'm uncomfortable, I'm going to go on my phone. I don't want to talk to this girl right now at the bar, so I'm going to go find her on the app that you said. You know, so like, that's your out. And we're saying, don't take the out.
Don't take the out. You got to finish the job. Finish what you started. Yeah. It's weird, too, because I think, like, one of the problems with kids' martial arts in the United States is that, like, they don't do them in time-induced blocks. So, like, if a kid walks into a karate gym or a jiu-jitsu gym or a judo gym, they just join up. And outside of like a summer camp type scenario, it's like, okay, this is going to last all year. And the kid doesn't have an end in sight. So if he experiences discomfort, he doesn't have a goal with which he can strive to make it to that point. He's just like, shit, I'm in this forever. Like there's no off season, there's no end date. So I think that if schools taught martial arts in like some sort of like paralleled seasons where kids said, oh, I'm going to do it from November to February, and then I'll go and play baseball at my school. The interest in a lot of martial arts would increase because the kids quit because they don't see an end. Right. Now you say, okay, I'm going to do it till February, and maybe they can go do something else. And now they want to come back to wrestling or jiu-jitsu or judo or whatever it is in that context. So getting back to, like you're saying, like north of Iran and the Caspian Sea, which is close to Dagestan.
Yeah.
The guys in Dagestan, like, what is that style of wrestling like? Like, can you give me some detail? I'm assuming it's very different than like the American folk style blast to double and keep people down. But is it influenced a lot by judo? Is it like slicker? Like, what do you think the difference up there is other than just that mentality of those like tough mountain people?
Yeah, I think, so I have a good friend who's from a similar area to that. He's from Tabriz, and his whole family is shepherds. He's one of like 14 kids. I think he has 3 sisters, and like the rest of them were all boys. And this is the best way I can explain this. You know, and Andy Hrovat spent a lot of time in Dagestan, and he saw the culture and all that stuff. But I remember being 15, I had won like state championships, nationals, all that stuff. And then I went to Tabriz. And this came, so people from Tabriz are Turks, you know, so they're really like,
Okay.
So we call them Payam Turke, right? So he's the Turkish Payam.
So racist, bro.
Yeah, I know. So like, this is so bad here now. You can't say that, but like, that's just, he was a Turkish Payam. So he could never make it in the city. But he said, there's a tournament in Tabriz. Why don't you come? I'm like, great. I'm going to the tournament. So this is my preparation in the city. You go cut weight. You make weight. You got 24 hours to the match. You go to this place where they skewer like liver and kidney and stuff like that. And then it's a line of cauliflower ears. You know, everybody has the same idea. And then you go back to your neighborhood next morning, jump on a motorcycle, go to the tournament, wrestle in the tournament, right? So I go to Tabriz, which is a mountainous area. And he's like, yeah, the tournament is in 4 days or 5 days. I'm like, great, that's awesome. I mean, cool to go to somewhere outside of the city. And again, it's mountainous. Most people wrestle. People are very quiet, you know, and then their lifestyle is this. Wake up in the morning, run the mountain, check on the wolves.
Check on the wolves?
Wolves to see what the wolf status is before they take the sheep out into the mountains.
Okay.
Not a short run. When this kid told me, Payam told me, like, we're going to go for a run, check on the wolves. I was like, all right, that's not bad. So we ran the mountain, probably like an hour up running. I was in shape and I was dying keeping up with him. I don't know what we were looking for. I didn't see anything. And then we ran back down. Tournament's in 4 days. His mom sets up this thing in like a bag and then like a sack, like a scarf. And then we take close to like 2,000 sheep out into the mountain. I'm like, all right, we'll be back tonight. 3 days later.
Would she pack you a tent?
No. Just food. That's it.
What the fuck?
3 days in the mountains with the sheep. I'm dying. I'm not cutting.
How old are you?
I'm 15. 15.
15-year-old. A lot of testosterone. Bunch of sheep in the mountains.
I know.
Yeah, I know.
That's messed up. But yeah, so 3 days in the mountains. 4th day, we're going to this wrestling tournament. I was the only person that was shocked. This was like their normal. This was the normal. We were hand fighting in the mountain. We were drilling. And I was like, we're not in the wrestling room. And I come from a wrestling culture. And this was a shock to me. So when people say, and when I tell you, like I was good in my weight class, you know? So I was hard
you
to
can
beat,
say it.
You know? So I was hard to beat in my weight class, you know? So
don't be, you don't have to be humble in here. That's one thing we're not.
So I worked, you know, and I worked my ass off. And then I couldn't hang with Payam. I couldn't hang with him or anybody from that area, you know? And it was just amazing. But this was his lifestyle.
Right.
24/7. Things that impressed me, I tell you this, man, that I still think about this day. I realized like a lot of the emotion that I carry in my face is for other people's comfort or discomfort. I couldn't tell if Payam was ever like upset, happy, sad, but he was always just neutral. And most people from there were like that. You know, it's just the expectation is to put a lot of work in. The expectation is that you're just going to wrestle. The expectation is that everything else doesn't stop because you wrestle. And then it's just, the culture was like around like being fucking wild. Like that's what it was, you know, and wrestling was such a big part of it. I went to this tournament, man. I'd never been so sore going into a tournament, you know, and I got beat bad, man. Like it was just crazy. The strength was in a different level. And the crazy thing is some of these kids would come to the national tournament. I probably wouldn't see them unless I drew them on the first round, you know? But it was crazy. So I would say when people were like, what is the wrestling like that over there? It's not about singles and high crotches only. It's not seen from one dimension. Like, like the kids from this area could throw you, could hurt you, and could like wrestle you from what you think wrestling is, like touch the head and shoot a double and shoot a single, you know? And it was just like, I don't know, it's a fabric of just like them as humans, you know? So I think it's hard to make up for that time. You could be in the best fitness program, best diet, best everything. Payam ate like sheep fat and like everything that they produce. It doesn't get any more fucking organic than that, you know? And then he walked the mountains all day, ran the mountains, took the sheep, went to wrestling practice. So there was never like, oh man, one of the sheep got eaten by a wolf and I had to kill a wolf so I can't make it to wrestling practice.
What's that sense of duty again?
just crazy.
You made a commitment to do something, and you find a way to do it.
You're gonna be there. So you just produce a different type of human, man. It's just,
I think there's a misconception, and maybe it's a misconception, maybe it isn't, and this is totally anecdotal. So tomorrow, Justin Gaethje fights Khabib, and I think that regardless of how the fight goes, it's an MMA fight. But when we talk about the wrestling differences between the two, I think there's a misconception among Westerners and Americans that if you're part of an organized Division I program, you're going to have a wrestling edge over someone who's wrestling up in the mountains, and maybe they get some tournaments, and maybe their style is got a judo influence, maybe it's got a sambo influence, maybe it's got all these different things. But I'm an American college wrestler. I'm part of a program with a system. So I think there's a misconception, and I'm really interested to see how that plays out. Now, of course, tomorrow it's not going to be a wrestling match, so we're not going to be able to see whose grappling is superior on an island, because there's going to be other things involved, punches and kicks and things like that. But I think that's one of those misconceptions, and because we're not exposed to that style of training, and we don't see those guys competing that often, we just think here selfishly that American college folk style wrestling is better.
And here's the other thing, right? So if you look at Dagestan, right? Saitiev brothers are from Dagestan. Sajidov from Dagestan. Sajidov is who beat Kale Sanderson in New York World Championships. Saitiev brothers, if you don't know them, look them up. Like, I don't think a family can win as many golds as they have.
Do your due diligence.
Yeah, exactly. And I would say 70% of wrestlers in the world and judo guys in the world who've won high medals in the Olympics in the world come from Dagestan. Come from that. I mean, think about it. Like, you can just look up anybody from Dagestan, and there's a difference. So if you're lucky enough, right, and if you're good enough in America, you'll make it to Division I wrestling program, right? And in that Division I wrestling program, hopefully one of your coaches is going to be somebody who maybe placed in the NCAAs. If you're lucky, you'll have like a Jordan Burroughs as one of your coaches, or a John Smith as one of your coaches, or a Kendall Cross as one of your coaches, right? So like Olympic champions, world champions, just like outstanding wrestlers. But if you're in Dagestan, chances are one of your coaches is somebody who's won like 3 Olympic medals, 7 world championships. I mean, how do you compete with, how do you, so that's the wrestling pedigree you come from. And then the environment and the lifestyle already caters to a human who's just like wilder, in a positive sense. I don't use wild in like a bad sense. Like, that's what we're trying to do on the farm, get people to be more wild so they can be more healthy, so that already exists in that culture. Like, there's nothing about that environment that needs to change. So those kids are born into a Division I program since day one. They don't just wrestle in a Division I program for 1 year or 4 years,
And when you're saying wild, you're not talking about kids being out of control. You're talking about peeling away like the chains of modern society, the iPads and all this other stuff. Like, just getting back to like being a living thing, not tethered to all this electronic communication, all this other shit that people are doing.
Think about it. I challenge people. Like, I challenge most people to say, how many times do you look at yourself in the mirror? I would say that's being far away from being wild. If you're a man or a woman, you're probably like looking at yourself in the mirror, like, is your tie right? Do you have the right clothes on? I don't know, is your hair good? Is this good? But like that I mean, and we're not even using technology, right? We haven't even gone to like, selfies and like Instagram and your posts about where you got your coffee, or like the new sneakers you bought, how you post it.
I fucking hate that shit about the coffee. I want to punch those people in the teeth. I really do. I don't care about your fucking coffee and your filter and like tagging Starbucks on Broadway.
But I challenge those people, man. Like, if they looked at all those times and be like, this brought me so much joy and happiness, I doubt it. I doubt it. I think what brings you joy and happiness? Run the fucking mountain.
Yeah, run the mountain. They think what brings them joy and happiness is the way that they force other people to look at them. When they construct a false reality, like they think, oh, this is the self that I want everyone to see, and it's not real. And that's what's the expected view of themselves by others is what gives them satisfaction. And you never even get to figure out or understand if that's actually what people are seeing when they look at you. There might be some people that look at you and they're like, oh man, okay, yeah, you went on a boat this weekend. You must be so fucking cool.
Yeah.
But most people are looking at you like, who gives a shit what
Yeah.
you did on a boat? Like, who cares?
Yeah.
Like, don't take a picture of it. If you were really having fun, you wouldn't have spent your time taking a bunch of fucking pictures of yourself, you know, with your Starbucks coffee. You would have been enjoying the boat and the people around you.
Yeah.
Instead, what you're trying to do is sell everybody else
Right.
on this life.
See, so I remember taking a group of high school kids from Andover. And if you're familiar with Andover was a wealthy place, you know, to this wrestling camp in Pennsylvania. And they had like 3 world champions who were like the guest clinicians. And the kids are like, I'm going to go say hi to them, all this stuff. I'm like, great, go say hi to him. You know, that's awesome. And they were like, oh, he's so mean. I was like, nah, he's not, man. He's not. He's not so tied up to what you think about him. And that's what makes a champion.
Right.
Years later, Shawn Harrington, he used to run Brick House Wrestling Club in Lowell. This guy's amazing. Shawn Harrington, he's the assistant coach at Harvard Wrestling Program. He was the assistant coach at Boston University. And he used to run this Brick House Wrestling in Lowell that was just amazing. He wrestled at UMass Lowell's Division 2 or 3 program. And I think at the end of his years at college, he was like, I'm not done. He packed up a van, drove to Colorado Springs, went to the Olympic Training Center, and then wrestled over there. He said he'd walk back to his camper crying, you know, and show up the next day and wrestle. So he told me, he was like, most of the champions in whatever sport you take, when they walk in the room, there's this aura about them. I thought a lot about that, you know. I'm like, what is that? Like, how can a human have that aura? But it's just like this disconnection. I don't really give a shit about what you think about me. I'm just on this journey, and then I'm just doing this thing, and it's just not about it. And I felt that. I felt that about Payan. I'd imagine anybody that fights Habib feels that about him. Right. You know, when they're walking the mat. And it's hard to match that, you know. And where we live, even if you meet like an NCAA Division I champion, you expect this like person that's going to cater to you. Like, hey, how you doing? Let me take a picture with you. Let me sign this. But more than likely, you're probably going to come up on a person who's like so into their craft and into just like being wild. And
borderline selfish about it.
Yeah, which is not a negative thing. We just talked about it earlier, you know. It's not a bad thing.
I think there's a difference between people who are doing great things and people who want to take pictures with people who are doing great things. Stop trying to take pictures with people who are doing great things. Put the fucking Instagram down and try and do something great yourself.
Yep.
Succeed or fail, doesn't matter. But like, just merely getting a bunch of likes because you took a picture with, you know, Kyle Dake doesn't make you any better at your craft. You're not a better wrestler for that. Getting the likes doesn't make you a better wrestler. You didn't like magically get another win or another medal. Like, put the fucking thing down and go do a bunch of penetration steps. Do something. Instead of taking pictures with other great men, try and be a great man yourself.
Whew.
Right?
Yes. Amen to that. Yeah.
And it goes back to like a lot of cultural differences here. So in Iran, you've experienced real oppression over there.
Yeah.
Like, what's homeboy's name who just got killed for speaking out against the government?
Navid Afghari, yeah.
And so, like, do you know a lot of the information? Like, do you know any of the details on that?
Yeah. So Navid was at a protest, you know. So for people who don't know, protests have been going on in Iran for a while, you know. And I think it's truly unfair to compare like the American government to the Iranian government. Because
why?
Because this is like land of the free man, home of the brave, you know. It's just that why is like,
because we don't have to crawl into the mountains and fucking check on the wolves.
Yeah, that. And the reality is, you can talk about, like, we can have this conversation freely, you know. We can talk about politics, we can talk about whatever we want, and you know you're going to go home to your loved ones, you know. In Iran, you don't have that promise. And that challenge, all these people will say how things are so unfair here and things are so bad and things are so negative here. Then I'd say, like, buy a one-way ticket, not a two-way, a one-way ticket to, I can only speak for Iran, so I haven't been to a lot of different places. I lived in Italy, I lived in Iran, lived in South Korea, and I lived here, you know. So I would say buy a ticket to Iran, a one-way ticket, not with the hope of like you can go back to your luxurious life that you hate. Live there where you can't speak for yourself. You have to watch over your shoulders, and like your meal is not promised, you know, and then see what oppression looks like. You know, I think in America, people who feel like they're oppressed is like, they just feel sorry for themselves, you know. I've thought a lot about that stuff. Like, when you feel sorry for yourself, when you want people to tap you on the back telling you how good of a job you're doing, either through your Instagram or through your interactions and things like that, I would say like you're setting yourself up for success. I experienced this firsthand, right? I moved to America, And in Iran, everybody's just like, all right, you can't tell me a story that I'm going to feel sorry for. It's just, we all have our own stories, and life is life, and just kind of go forward, figure it out, you know? I moved to Needham, you know, and people are like, oh, you came from Iran, it must be so tough. And like, wow, the earthquake hit. And part of that, a lazy part of me, I was like, oh man, yeah, poor me, man. I must have it so tough, you know?
Right.
But it was this priming to, I would say like priming you to feel like oppressing yourself almost, you know? Like this, like, oh, feel sorry for yourself. How poor you, you know? Right. And it's just like,
do you think there's a part of human nature that needs to feel like a sense of like misery about something? Like in America, so almost everybody, like, I mean, there's an unfortunate amount of people who like live their lives on the street and things like that, and who don't have a meal. But most people in America, like, even though, like, short of the people who are unfortunately living on the street, everyone's got a cell phone. Everyone's got a smartphone. Everyone knows where their meal is coming from. Everyone knows all these things. And it's because life is actually so good that we start attaching ourselves to these unbelievably bullshit causes, like, you know, what character is on the cover of a cereal box and might be offensive to someone. Like, life is so good that we have nothing to be miserable about, that we start attaching ourselves to that stuff. Whereas in a country with real oppression, people are not offended by like cartoon characters and songs and, you know, holiday carols, because they experience real oppression day in and day out.
Man. Yeah, I think some perspective on it, just in Iran, if you drink and get caught drinking, your first offense is 120 lashes, you know? Your second offense is like 250 or 220. And
lashes of what?
It's actually a crazy experience. You take your clothes off.
I'm in.
I'm in. Yeah, so far so good.
Yeah.
You're down to your underwear. Pour water on your back. They handcuff you to this like bench. Your feet are handcuffed. Your hands are handcuffed, and then you're basically
still not that bad.
Yeah, still not too bad, right? And then they have this weaved leather whip that's like weaved pretty stiff, you know? And then 120 still in, right? 125 lashes from the base of your neck to your ankle.
All right, I'm out.
Right? So that's the first time. Second time is 250. Third time is a public lashing, you know? So all for drinking, you know? Because the regime that like runs the country is an Islamic-based regime, so they make it illegal. If you have sex with your girlfriend, consensual, non-consensual, doesn't matter. If she loses her virginity, you have to marry her. You both go to prison first. You have to marry her. You both get lashed. And then they call this like mehriye, which is like dowry, you know? Your dowry is like whatever the dowry is that your family and her family sets, but then one of your hands.
What?
So if you divorce her, say goodbye.
If you divorce her, you have to cut your hand off?
Yeah,
which one?
I don't know how they pick. Both.
I mean, because if you get divorced, you're going to need one of them.
Yeah.
It's either gonna be
the stranger hand
or the stranger.
Yeah, man. So that just scratches the surface. Not to mention like all the kids who end up in college, go to college, they're super smart, but their family doesn't work for the government, or they don't know somebody, and they end up driving a cab or working, I don't know, at the fruit market or something that way. Like there's engineers that are like driving cabs. They're PhDs who are like,
why? Because the economy doesn't support those professions.
They do, but they support it for, you know, the 1% who run the government.
And there's no way for people with those types of credentials to come here and work.
They would have to like transfer their credentials and maybe go to school here. So I think people are pretty detached from the fact that like somebody like me, and I'm not even a great example. They're way better examples, you know. At 17, I could come here, I would get a degree, and I could go from my degree to a job that pays. And I can even take that degree and maybe open up a business. Right. That's unheard of in Iran.
So it's important for people to understand that you came here by yourself at 17 years old from a very different country and a very different lifestyle, very different religion. Your grandmother was here, right? Mm-hmm. And at 17, you came here, went to school, got a master's degree, you have a post.
Like a LICSW.
Cool. And now you've got a farm with a bunch of animals on it and a wife and one kid and another wrestler on the way.
Yeah.
And and you're doing all these things, and you basically got dropped off here from another country with nothing.
Yeah.
And
You
Americans
could not do that. Like I challenge any American kid, any European kid, any all these kids who have it so hard, you know, based on what they share. Go to Iran and do it.
Or just fucking do it here.
Yeah, you can do it here. That's
of course
you can do it here. That's like the crazy thing to me, that like you can do you. I mean, that whole thing, like you can do it, you know, but you actually can do it.
But we've made victimology an art here.
Right.
We've made victimology an art here.
And that's why I think the love of wrestling is the answer, man. Things like wrestling is the answer.
Eliminates excuses.
Yeah.
I always say, like, to my guys, like, one of the things I think, like, preparation, the number one thing I try to accomplish when I prepare for even the tournaments that I still do is my goal is to eliminate every excuse, so that at the end of the day, if I don't get the desired result, there's only two options. Either I fucked up or that guy was better. There is no I didn't do my cardio. There is no I was hurt. There is no the ref screwed me. There is no any of this. There is no my training partner didn't show up. Preparation is about eliminating excuses. And I think that America, we are so good at like handing people a silver platter of excuses, and you can now take your pick. Anything like that you're unsuccessful at, we can not even give you an excuse, but we can give you a malady that then is accompanied by a prescription.
You always have an out. You know,
There's always an out.
I tell you this, man, like once in a while I come across people from a different culture than the American culture. And then that's my moment of reality, you know, because I've been here for a while now, you know, so you get comfortable with this life and a lot of the luxuries that come with this life, which is like, there's always a situation to feel comfortable in, you know, but once in a while, like I'll meet, you know, a wrestler from the Middle East or a wrestler from a different part of the world, or just a person from a different part of the world where they don't tell me what I like to hear. And for a moment, I'm fucking pissed. And I'm like, that's fucking bullshit. But I'm like, whew. When I walk away from it, I'm like, man, that's fucking awesome. You know?
Yep.
Like, I want a comfortable answer. I want an out.
Right.
But I was handed the truth, you know? And I've come across that. And in the moment I'm pissed off, you know, and this is bullshit, blah, blah, but then I get a quick reminder of like,
but in the long
truth is not always convenient.
Truth is not always convenient. And in the long run, smart people realize that.
All right.
And I think like when you're learning things or when you're going through things, whether it's, you know, learning a skill, a mental skill or a physical skill, the convenience factor early on might make you feel like you're making progress, but in reality, the inconvenient learning process probably stays with you a lot longer.
Yeah, definitely, man. Yeah. So you know how I mentioned the matches in Iran were 3-1, 2-1. Those are the scores, you know? So if you wrestle, that's a very close score. You know, think about a 6-minute match and you can maintain a 2-1 match. When I came to Massachusetts, most like 15 points is a tech fall in folk style. Most of my matches with tech falls are pins in the first period. You know, like wow, look how good I've gotten.
Right.
Wow, look how comfortable I'm becoming. If I could go back and do it again, I would say, Grandma, make me homeless in Pennsylvania. You know, drop me off in New Jersey. You know, just so I could continue to stay sharp in that way. You know, not just in wrestling, but just mentally. You know, because there's a laziness that comes with. Boom, this match is over in 30 seconds. This match is over in the second period.
Well, you can start to rest on your laurels.
Absolutely.
And you get real comfortable doing the thing that you're doing. And it's only when you have like close fights or close matches or a bunch of losses that you go back and you address the things you did wrong. I mean, it's such a cheesy saying, you learn more from your losses than you do for your victories, but it's actually really true. It's actually really true. You get comfortable. It's a unique individual that can be at the top and stay hungry while they're at the top.
Yeah. How many people can say like, oh, I learned when I stopped learning? That doesn't even fucking make sense, right? So you're always learning as long as you're in that learning process.
Exactly.
There's no way you're going to be in a learning process in a comfortable environment. So I would say if you're, I don't know, want to become a jiu-jitsu star or a wrestling star or like the best fighter you can be in the gym when you don't like hearing the stuff you're hearing.
Right.
If you're in that gym, you're in the right gym.
That's one of the things I think of, like, I tell my guys sometimes, like, I'm not here to make you feel good. Like, and it's a kind of a contradiction because I try and coach with like a tinge of like old school wrestling mentality, but jiu-jitsu is a business now. And you're like, you know, it's something that gives people a life and a lifestyle and can make money. So it's like to take personal trainers, for example. Like a personal trainer's job isn't really to get you results, because to get you the results you want, you're going to have to go through pain. And to go through pain, you're going to wind up stop paying and quitting. So the personal trainer's job is actually to keep you towing the line. You lose a pound here, you gain a pound there. You lose a pound here, you gain a pound there. It's an illusion of progress, but the reality is comfort. And that's why you keep paying. You keep paying for comfort and the ability to say, I'm going to a personal trainer. And that's what a lot of like martial arts students do. They're paying for comfort and the ability to say, hey, I go to jiu-jitsu. And that way on Saturday night, they can bullshit everybody and be like, oh no, that's not what that guy should do when they're watching a pay-per-view. But the reality is that the real coach is going to tell you the things that you don't want to hear. And in order to do that, it contradicts with the business sense. And as I say all the time, like the best way to run a jiu-jitsu school is not necessarily the best way to teach jiu-jitsu. There's a huge difference there. And I think a lot of people don't see that. And when they get some tough love, it can deter people from the sport, unfortunately. But it only deters people that have a misconception of the sport. Like that this is going to be easy. Tomorrow, when Justin Gaethje fights Khabib, what's going to happen?
I think Khabib is going to be Khabib, you know. I think Justin Gaethje, obviously both of them are amazing athletes, but I think, I don't know, you're not going to throw somebody like Khabib off his game. Obviously, I'm really interested in seeing how he competes without his dad. You know,
that's the thing I thought too.
That's the X factor a little bit, you know. But there's a few things about Khabib that scare the hell out of me, right?
Tell me.
One is his faith. Kind of like truly unshakable. So it goes back to the thing like bigger than yourself, you know. And in Iran, that's huge. You know, I think a lot of the wrestlers before they went to the Olympics did like visit a holy place before they went to the Olympics. So I think it's really hard to break somebody who believes in something bigger than themselves. You know, so like that's just like puts you on a different level. But I don't think you're gonna come and undo. I don't know how old Khabib is. 30 years old, maybe.
Something like that.
You're not gonna undo 30 years of being a full human to the full capacity, which being as wild as possible. I just don't think you'd do that, you know? And I think a very special person would do that. Again, MMA is not my specialty, so anything can happen, obviously, because anything happens all the time. But all those anythings that could happen hasn't happened to Khabib. And I just don't think that's an accident. What do you think, man? What do you think?
I wonder what the effect of his dad passing will do. Like, so I remember when he fought Conor, and I was talking to Musafar, and Moose was telling me, he said, listen, Musafar is a friend we have in common, who's one of the wrestling coaches at Harvard, who is from Uzbekistan. And Moose told me, one of the greatest thing Conor does is he gets in everyone's head. And he said, there is zero chance Conor gets in Khabib's head. He said, you don't understand people from that part of the world. Conor has a silver tongue, but this guy has seen some shit Conor will never see. And I believed Moose when he said that. And he was 100% right. The psyops that Conor usually runs did not work on Khabib. So now I wonder, like, was his dad passing, is that going to be a source of weakness or a source of strength for him? What role did he play in his training camp? Is AKA a place where he just has training partners and his dad develops the game plan? Or had he outgrown his dad and he was more of a spiritual figure and he was getting all of his coaching from the guys at AKA? I don't know what the answer is. But outside of that, I think like in terms of like the technical part of the fight, I think it will be the fighter who respects the other person's game to the point at which they alter their own game will lose. I think if Khabib stays at range because he's afraid to move forward on Gaethje because of the quick right hands and the left hooks, I think he gets chewed up on the feet. If Gaethje gets less aggressive with the punches because he thinks Khabib is going to shoot underneath and take him down, I think Gaethje loses. So I think it becomes a matter of which guy alters his game plan the least for his opponent, because they're both so talented. In some fights, you've got to alter your game plan and find the path of least resistance for the victory. You've got to find where your skills match up the most favorably with your opponent, and that becomes your path to victory. I do know that Gaethje's been taken down before, and when he's been taken down, his way of getting up is a very folk-style way of getting up, which is turning his back and doing stand-ups. And I think that the style of grappling Khabib has, if you show your back, he's going to jump on it. The guys that he stood up on in the past in MMA don't necessarily have that style of grappling where they're going to take the back. if it were me, and I'm just a guy here in South Boston, we have not seen Gaethje wrestle much at all. If it were me and I were Gaethje's coach, I would have him come out, and within the first 90 seconds, I'd have him shoot on Khabib. And I would change the whole thing up. Yeah. Folk style wrestling is about taking people down and keeping them down. Yeah. And I think that that's, this is a conversation for another day, but I think folk style wrestling is the better base for MMA than freestyle or Greco, because especially with the way that they'll break you off the cage now, the Greco techniques are less applicable only because you have less time to execute them. In folk style, when you take someone down, your job is to keep them down. So if it were me, I would have Gaethje taking Khabib down as early as possible and just totally throw the whole thing for a loop and try and pummel him a little bit. It's well known that Gaethje may have gassing issues. He's publicly stated that wrestling makes him tired. Well, wrestling defensively against a chain wrestler like Khabib will exhaust you. So for me, a guy who's always a compromised cardio, I would take you down and find my spot to sit in and start dropping elbows. That's what I would do. Really cool, Can I predict who will win? Fuck no. I have no idea.
I know, that's a tough one. You mentioned Muzaffar, right? I remember being at Lockhaven. I was a redshirt freshman, and it was a huge tournament happening. The Lockhaven Classic, I think it was happening. And then the defending NCAA champion in Muzaffar's weight class, which I think it was 157, right? So, and Muzaffar had just come over here from Uzbekistan, and he was a junior college world champion. Not many people had seen him. Also for American University. No emotion on his face. Nothing. No big movements, nothing. NCAA champion didn't make it out of the second round. Not because he got teched. He was close to getting teched. It just because he broke. Yeah. He broke, and when Muzaffar says you don't know, it's just you don't know. And that's a great example of how an NCAA Division I champion the year before did not compare to somebody like Muzaffar. So I think you take Muzaffar and make his wrestling even better, and make his fighting better. It's probably like Khabib, So it's tough. It's really tough to just match that, It really is. But again, fighting, I don't know. There's so many other factors, but it's just really.
I think this will be
tough.
I'm a huge Khabib fan, and we break down his style, what he does on the cage and what he does when he gets people to the mat. We've broken it down so many times to try and teach it to our guys, and so I'm a huge fan. I'm a little bit nervous. I think I rewatched the Gaethje Ferguson fight last night, and the way Gaethje just slides out of range just a little bit and throws that right hand so fast, it's going to be tough to get him down. But
Gaethje could break the Dagestan train.
He could.
Because it was Islam, Zabit, Habib, his cousin. It just seems like the whole village is moving to the UFC. So it's
it's a scene.
Yeah.
It's a scene.
So it's, it'd be interesting. That'd be interesting to see how it goes.
Well, that's a good place to end it here. Soap, as always, I appreciate you hanging out with me for a little bit of time. And I'm probably going to open another one of these bottles of wine when you leave here and drink myself to sleep. But thanks for coming down, as always, my man. And tell people where they can find out about the farm.
Definitely, man. Thanks for having me, John. It's really special to be here. The farm, bewell@blackbarnfarm.com is where you can find us. That's our website. And obviously, you can find us on Facebook, bewell@blackbarnfarm.com. And Instagram, blackbarnfarmtherapy.com, or Blackbarn Therapy is the name. Yeah.
Awesome, man. Thanks, Soap.
Thanks for having me.
As always, guys, click the subscribe button so you get this intel as fast as we do. That's it for us, everybody. Thanks, as always, to our guests for coming down to Podcast Alley and spending a few minutes with us shooting the shit. Don't forget to click the subscribe button so you get this intel as fast as we do. Good night, everybody.